OK, music fans, you're going to love this because it seems, well, it's hard to believe, isn't it? 50 years this week since the release of the Beatles' first hit, Love Me Do.
Well, all sorts of things are planned to mark the Fab Four's anniversary here on South Today this week.
And BBC Radio 7's Alex Dyke will be looking at the Beatles in the South and delighted to say he is here in Technicolor, full Technicolor, here with me on the studio. Good to see you, Alex.
Thank you very much.
We don't need an excuse, do we, really? Because the Beatles, we can just play them. They're just fantastic.
Well, the music is always sounding fresh when you hear it on the radio, isn't it? They're just great songs that are going to last for at least another 50 years.
It is. I mean, that's the wonderful thing, isn't it? I mean, if you don't know the Beatles or you weren't brought up with the Beatles, you still know them because they are played over and over again. But you and I have got something in common, and I don't think you've seen this.
I haven't.
No, Sgt. Pepper's, look at that, famous album cover. You're there.
I'm there, 1967. There I am, on the cover.
Not bad, is it? Did you know I was there as well?
I saw you. I remember that day, looking a lot like Diana Dawes.
Do you know what? I haven't changed a bit. Oh, perhaps I have. Do you know, if I look that good then, I wish I could look that good now, I tell you. Now, look, we're going to see some lovely films this week that you have made. And I hadn't realised, until I saw these films, just how much the Beatles came down here to the South.
They love the South, particularly Bournemouth, and there's lots of references. Every summer we can rent a cottage in the Isle of Wight from the Sgt. Pepper album, Ticket to Ride, a bit of a connection there.
Yeah, sure.
Loads and loads of live gigs, probably more than a lot of people think in the South.
Yeah, so what are we going to start with tonight?
We're going to Bournemouth tonight. I'm retracing some Beatle steps in Bournemouth.
Look forward to it.
Love me do.
In this, the 50th anniversary of the Beatles, we're going to talk about the Beatles in the South. They played more gigs at the Bournemouth Gaumont Theatre than any other theatre outside of London. I've got Nick Churchill with me. He wrote a book about the Beatles in Bournemouth. Nick, let's go for a magical mystery tour.
If there's anything that you want, if there's anything I can do.
So, Nick, Beatlemania in this alley.
Absolutely. It must have been like a scene out of A Hard Day's Night. But there was one occasion the Beatles were trying to get into the stage door. The door was locked, so there would have been fans streaming down these stairs. The message hadn't got through to the guy inside. The door was still locked. There was bedlam out here. A photographer took a couple of photographs, and they just about got the boys in time.
Safe and sound in time for the gig.
That's right. So a group of lads hid in the bins here, and before the Beatles went on stage, they were brought down to the alleyway to the door, and these lads leapt out of the bins and made the Beatles laugh just before they went on stage. That's been their claim to fame ever since.
Excellent.
You know I feel okay.
Nick, we're in the Premier Inn, which in 1963 was the Palace Court Hotel, and this balcony was open then.
It was. The Beatles were here for 6 days. They would have spent most of the days in the lounge doing press and in other interviews. And then they would come out on the balcony to talk or have photographs taken, and hordes of fans that were camped outside the pavilion opposite would have screamed at the sight of a mop top.
And a Beatles song was written in this hotel.
Yeah, George Harrison had a really heavy cold the week that he was here, so for a while was confined to his room, and there he wrote his first song for the Beatles, a song called Don't Bother Me. It turned up on their second album with the Beatles.
So go away, leave me alone, don't bother me.
Plus, an iconic album cover was shot here.
The sleeve shot for With the Beatles was shot in the restaurant at the Palace Court Hotel by the photographer Robert Freeman.
Every night I'm all alone.
Nick, Bournemouth Rock was made famous by the Beatles.
They were photographed by a local photographer called Harry Taylor, and he was known for finding the unusual and the unexpected. And he nipped to the corner shop here, the tobacconist and newsagent on the corner, came back with 4 sticks of rock, gave them to the Beatles, took them out on the balcony here at the Palace Court, and photographed the meeting sticks of rock. It's an almost iconic shot of the Beatles in Bournemouth now.
Nick, we're in Sandbanks. What's the Beatle connection here?
Well, in 1965, John bought a house here for his Aunt Mimi, who brought him up in Liverpool from the age of 5. He paid £25,000 for a harbourside bungalow just over our shoulders here, and Mimi lived here until her death in 1992.
Now, when John Lennon was gunned down in December 1980 in New York, BBC South Today came down here to speak to Aunt Mimi. She wouldn't appear on camera, but she did agree to speak to us, and we thought you might just like to listen to this. It's quite powerful.
There's never been a time that he doesn't ring up, put his funny voices on, you know, and says, "This is Father Christmas," you know, in the middle of summer.
How did you first hear of the tragedy?
I first heard the tail end of it at 7 o'clock. John Lennon, now what has he been up to? And I thought by the tone of the voice, It was serious, so I shot out of bed and came down, and before I could put the news on, Yoko rang up. Well, of course, I was stunned, completely stunned, and it hasn't sunk in yet. I can't believe it.
There was Aunt Mimi there, and I mean, the whole world was stunned. I mean, it was one of those moments where you knew where you were when you heard that news. I know I was driving at the time. It was the middle of the night, I think we heard it on Radio 4.
Their longevity, though, is extraordinary, isn't it?
It's
who
incredible.
from today will get this in 50 years' time?
I know.
I just don't see that there is any group or band that's had that kind of effect on generations.
No, because it came at such a pivotal time, didn't it? The good thing is that Alex is going to be back tomorrow night because he's going to be meeting someone who became a backstage Beatle on their tour of the South. We'll also be hearing your Beatle memories on Radio Solent. You can listen to them throughout the week. And on Friday, on Solent, there'll be a special Beatles documentary with the one and only Tony Blackburn. So look forward to that on Radio Solent.